Before we start the formal part tonight, I'd like you all to stand and say a short prayer, last thing in remembrance of the dead, and then we'll have a minute's silence for all lost Irish mountaineers and for the people of the battle. They shall not grow old, as we who are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. We will remember them. Now we'll have a minute's silence, please. Thank you very, very much. Now, I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of Dawson, Kevin, and all the other engineers and people who have come here as well. I'd like to extend to you the warmest possible welcome to you all tonight. We are going to introduce you tonight to places most of you have never been to. The land of ice, snow, piercing winds, monsoon rains, crevices, steep slopes, huge drops, glaciers, of amazing sunrises, of avalanches, with serious injury or death a possibility on every step. Yet for many men and women, these are the risks they are prepared to experience in pursuit of a dream or a love of a mountain. Tonight we offer you chance to step into the lives of Howard Bury of this house we're in tonight, and of Anthony Adams Reilly of Ballynay, about 3 miles away. Two men of great courage and character who set out to discover, chart, and map arguably the 2 greatest mountain ranges in the world, i.e. the Alps and the Himalayas. Both men played an iconic part in climbing and exploring and mapping some of the world's most dangerous terrain. This being an extraordinary coincidence, bearing in mind the flatness of the contiguous mean they left behind. In the case of Nepal, Dawson Stelfox will take you to a land of astonishing beauty, inhabited by some of the world's most wonderful people, yet poverty-stricken and having to endure appalling hardships and earthquakes that we've seen in recent days, and with a hopeless, inferior infrastructure to cope. We would ask you, therefore, that if you have not done so already, when you're leaving, would you dig into your pockets and support our Nepal at Great Fund. In the case of the French Alps, Kevin Higgins will take you to land of fabulous beauty. The French Alps, where Adam Reilly spent many years carrying out his much varied work. Many of you will have already experienced or have been to the French Alps and seen the beauty and maybe the difficulties of climbing, of trekking, of skiing in Chamonix, Argentière, Mont Blanc, and the Monte Rosa area, most frequented by Adam Reilly. We're grateful tonight for so many people, especially we remember Marion Keeney, who was the biographer of Colonel Bury, Jonathan Shackleton, and there's no need to tell you who he is, Willie Penrose, Tim Lavery from the Irish Explorers Association, Christy May, Sean O'Connell, Peter O'Connell, Peter summited Everest last year. Peter's from Galway, made it to the top about 2 years ago. We welcome you here, Peter. We also, I think we have a little man, is he here? Zach Wright. Is Zach here? No, Jack is 12. Zach is 12. Climbed Kilimanjaro, and 2 weeks ago climbed the 4 Irish peaks in under 38 hours. We also wish to thank the Westmeath County Council and Paddy Hill, the county officer, and Martina, Bridget, and Mary of Belvedere here. We thank especially Morris Jensen, without whom this just would not be possible. Bit cross, bit contrary, but he turns out pretty good. Des will be here and Christian May. I couldn't say enough about them. Des and his staff, Barry, they've been wonderful to us. Nothing was too much trouble. And as for Christy and the archives he has, if there's a vacancy in the National Museum, he'll just have to take it as an archivist. We would also like to mention people who we're going to, I'll tell you what we're going to actually do. After, when I finish, I'm going to introduce you to Kevin Higgins. Kevin is from Mullingar, but he lived most of his life in Virginia. He has been climbing mountains for 20, 30, and 40 years. But he's one of the strangest of them. In 1963, those of you who were at the All-Ireland would have seen Kevin captaining the Westmeath team in goals. And he didn't keep a clean sheet. Terry only got one goal. Well done. But Kevin is going to talk to you on the career, the works, and whatever of Anthony Adams. Right? Kevin.
Westmeath happens to be in the privileged position of having the lowest high point of any county in the country. So you could say, therefore, that Westmeath is the lowest county in the country. But the story I'm going to tell you is about a man who went from the lowest county in Ireland. The story of a man from the lowest county in Ireland who went to the highest point in Western Europe, at least a half a dozen times. Okay, not close enough. So this Mullingar mountaineer, I hope you can see that from back in the back. His great-grandfather was Thomas O'Reilly, and with a name like that, as you expect, he had connections. He came from Roebuck in County Cavan, near Mount Nugent. His only daughter and heir married Captain Adams from Belmont. Close enough, I think. How was that? Sorry. So the daughter and heir of Thomas Reilly. Thank you. Thank you this time. So Miss O'Reilly married Captain Adams from Belmont, just outside Mullingar, probably about a mile in a straight line from here. And oh, this has really wrecked my head. She married William, who took the name Adams Reilly instead of his name Adams. He added the name Reilly to it. Now, they had a son called William,
who married a Longford girl, and their son was Anthony Miles William Adams Reilly. He seldom used a hyphen between the Adams Reilly, so he was called generally Adams Reilly. And he was born in 1936 in February. And he grew up, therefore, into the family years. Now, more than likely, the family didn't impinge very much on his life. He was wealthy enough because over the few generations, he had lost the O and inherited extensive lands in Westmeath, Longford, and Cavan. So I feel the famine didn't impinge very much on his life. There's not much record of his early years in Mullingar, but
climbing incessantly on different peaks. He had already attempted the Matterhorn a number of times, unsuccessfully. This was Edward Wimper. And he heard about this man from Mullingar who was climbing all over the western side of the Alps, and he was impressed by his performance. So he sent a message to Reilly, would you accompany me on an attempt on the Matterhorn from the Swiss side? He had been already attempting from the Italian side unsuccessfully. Reilly agreed. He said, I'll help you. I suppose he said something like that. And on condition, however, that Wimper would assist him doing a revision survey of the map he had started on the previous year. Wimper agreed to this in 1864, they did serious climbing around Shanghai and did a number of first ascents together. The Matterhorn is probably the most iconic mountain, certainly in Europe, if not in the world. The ridge they had proposed to climb was the edge that's facing you. This is the Reilly ridge. The Italian side is the right-hand edge, more or less, of the mountain. After the survey was completed with Wimper and Reilly, they went over to Zermatt to make an attempt at the mountain. When they arrived, there was a telegram waiting for Wimper to come back to London. He was an engraver business product, so they didn't attempt that route that year. Reilly sketched the way, and you can see it's very similar to the photograph. This is one of Reilly's sketches of the map. Wimper, as I said, was an engraver, and he, in subsequent years, produced a classic, what turned out to be a classic book called Scrambles Amongst the Alps. In the early editions of that book,
He sketched Reilly.
These are his views of Reilly on those times where they were stuck for a day with fog.
This is what Reilly looked like at coming. Reilly's map was produced by the Alpine in 1865. This is
I don't think my voice is loud enough to carry that without the microphone, or is it? No.
Here we go again. This is a section of Reilly's map, and you can see that it's quite different from modern day maps. There aren't contour lines on it, for instance, and it really looks a little bit more like a picture, a bird's eye view picture of the landscape. However, it was accurate in terms of the relationship of summits, ridges, glaciers, etc. And soon after the production of this map, the French authorities produced their own map that was probably more like a modern Ordnance Survey map. And there were criticisms of both Reilly's and the French production, which was at a much bigger scale than Reilly's. But this map was used for a number of years afterwards for mountaineers in that area. Now, the map was produced in 1865, and Reilly went back to the Alps in that year to make another map of the Monte Rosa area in northern Italy. When he was on doing his survey work there, he got terrible news. Wimper had come back the same summer, and with 6 other people, he had climbed the ridge that Reilly and he had planned to do the previous year. But in the descent, one of the party slipped and dragged 4 of them to their deaths. And that's what Reilly was upset about, because Wimper was his friend. So he immediately rushed from northern Italy back to Zermatt to try to comfort his friend in the aftermath of this tremendous accident. As he said, he had no heart to remain any longer in these blood-stained mountains and went back to London. And the result of the accident was commented upon. It was controversial at the time, and still is to some extent. The Queen, Victoria, made comments about mountaineering, and it came to the state where mountaineering was almost banned as an activity for this terrible, useless waste of life. However, it didn't stop Reilly from climbing. He went back to the Alps again in the following years. And one of the important things about these wealthy people climbing was that they used guides. And although we'll say Whymper is claimed to be the first person to ascend the Matterhorn, he had guides with him. Reilly sketched one of the guides. This is Michael Cross, who was Whymper's guide, and he was one of the guides who died in the Matterhorn accident. The guides were local men who had good knowledge of the terrain and were employed by the tourists because of their knowledge of climbing and the terrain to help them in their attempts on the mountains. Because Reilly gave so much assistance to the French authorities, they decided to name a number of mountain features to commemorate Reilly's help. Unfortunately, you can't see the titles on this picture, but the low point towards the right of the ridge is called Col Adams Reilly. The high point, but not the highest point, in between in the center of the picture, is Aiguille Adams Reilly. The big mountain is Aiguille du Chardonnay. Now, you will get these features on Google Maps. Put in Col Adams Reilly, and you'll get a picture of these features. On the other side of the ridge, there is a glacier. Not the one that's low down, but the little tiny one high up, which is called Glacier Adams Reilly. And it seems to have receded quite a bit from Adams Reilly's time. He came back to Mullingar in 1868 and lived here until 1871, but he went back to the Alps in 69. So the likelihood is that he travelled by train from Mullingar to England, to France, and into the Alps. He climbed for the last time, the seventh and last time, climbed Mont Blanc and one of the Aiguilles in Chamonix. He returned in 1871 to London from Mullingar, and there may be reasons for this. It was at a time when there was quite a lot of tenant unrest in the Midlands especially. And 1871 was the year of the Westmeath Act at Westminster to restrain or put down the tenant unrest. Now, whether that has a connection between Reilly going back to London or not, I'm not sure, but the years are similar. He was offered the presidency of the Alpine Club in 1874, but decided that he wasn't up to it. And out of modesty, I feel, he declined. In 1881, he returned to Ireland to live among his own people. But by then, he didn't come back to Mullingar, so it seems that his properties were disposed of in that time. He had two sisters, and they married people from Tipperary. But one would think that if he came back to Ireland to live among his own people, he would have come to Mullingar. He went to Delgany instead, and when he was there, he was visited by a friend of his, a climbing friend of his, Matthews from Birmingham, who found him in really bad health. And in April of that year, he died of a stroke in Dublin. And he's buried in a little churchyard in Tipperary called in Coolbawn, almost overlooking Lough Derg. And this happens to be in the graveyard plot of his sisters, the Minchins. It's in the Minchin family plot. The Alpine Club arranged the erection of a Celtic cross on his grave. And it looks like a Celtic cross, and it is, but when you get a close-up look, instead of the Celtic, what would you call them, the Celtic designs on the cross, it's carved with Alpine plants, it seems, including Edelweiss and the regular Alpine plants. And it's in white marble. Matthews attended the funeral and had this to say about his friend. If you can see it. So, thanks very much to you all for listening and to the Alpine Club for their assistance. Thank you.
Friend of many of ours who set out a year or two ago to climb the 7 highest, each peak in the 7 continents. A couple of months ago he had done a 6th, and 3 weeks ago he was doing his 7th and last Mount Everest. I refer of course to Paul Devaney from that, known to many of us here. He was on Camp 3, I think, the morning of the earthquake. He was there for a safe. When he heard about the disaster down below, like most climbers, he came back down to help in the rescue effort in as much as he could. We're going to show you now a video he sent us yesterday about the return to Kathmandu to assist in the rescue. And we're going to show you now the video of Paul sent to us yesterday.
An incredible night of commemorating some great Midlands adventurers and heroes, Charles Howard-Bury and Anthony Adams. It's great as a fellow Midlander to see such people of incredible depth and adventure being honoured tonight, and I congratulate everyone involved in this event. I'm talking to you from a pretty shaken and pretty destroyed Kathmandu and Paul. It's been a dreadful few weeks here, and I'm down here at Durbar Square. You can see some of the areas in the room behind me. The city has taken a hell of a shake in the last couple of weeks, and the whole region has had a major shock, which will take a long time to recover from. Those of us that were up at Everest, like myself, witnessed the avalanche from Pomori and the destruction of base camp, which is the first time, I think, in the history of Everest climbing that base camp has been destroyed in such a way. And it was pretty shocking and pretty harrowing stuff to live through and to experience. But to see adventurers and climbers and Sherpa flip from their everyday job of guiding people and climbing into the job of rescue, recovery, and getting people either back to hospital or back to their loved ones for burial was pretty incredible to see. And I think that human spirit was alive and kicking when it was needed at Everest Base Camp. Here in Kathmandu, the city is recovering. This area here probably has most of the visual destruction. There have been a lot of houses damaged and buildings knocked, but by and large the city has come out pretty okay from what have been now 2 earthquakes, one the day before yesterday and one on the 25th of April. And I think the message that needs to go out is that a lot of the damage here is not necessarily in the centre of Kathmandu, it's out in the villages. We were in a village yesterday giving out some tarps, and the village was basically destroyed. And everywhere we've been in the rural areas, we've seen village after village after village completely destroyed. In a lot of cases, those villagers are using brick and mud rather than brick and houses simply crumbled. So the problems that we've seen in people being displaced and killed have been a combination of pretty bad building codes in the city areas, pretty bad building generally, and a lack of good material in the hills and the rural areas, as well as villages being built on plains and on inclines where they should not be, places that are rife for landslides in the annual monsoon season. And really the race is on now to try and get as much aid and as much help before the monsoons hit. We're about 4 weeks from monsoon season now, and we really need to get everyone into shelter here, and we really need to get people to safe locations, especially up in areas up on the Tibetan border near Langtang, Rawal, and these sort of areas where people are living in areas that are very much at risk. And so I think we've transitioned here from the rescue relief into a kind of recovery mode. And that's where your help is very much needed. There's a lot of people doing a lot of things all over Ireland to try and raise money, coffee mornings, dinners, various climbing events and so on. And that's going to need to continue. Today I saw where the UN has only raised a portion, a tiny percentage of its overall target for Nepal. So it's had an insignificant impact so far financially. And the UN is one of the biggest agencies. And so I think whilst at local levels, people in small towns and small villages at home are doing their bit to try and help 1 or 2 families out here, on the larger level, the humanitarian aid is nowhere near the size that it needs to be. So it's going to have to continue. And so for your event tonight, which I think is incredible, I want to say really a well done to everyone involved. It's fantastic again to see something like this happening in the Midlands. And you know, to everyone involved, I know Dawson, Star Fox is there with you, and Dawson's footprint is you know, it can be seen up and down the valleys here, not just on the top of Everest, but in the school of Reilly and the other areas where him and the INET group are actually helping the education of some of the locals. And so I take my hat off to Dawson for that. He's an incredible guy, and you're very lucky to have him there with you. And I know Kevin Higgins is there with you as well, talking from Mountaineering Ireland. And I believe Michael Duffy has been one of the ones that's put in a lot of the legwork to make it tonight happen. And so congratulations to you and your committee. It's great that you're honouring people of such grandeur as these 2 gentlemen. Certainly our route to Everest is in footprints of the work that the 1921 mission done, the work that the 1924 mission done, work later done by Lorraine Densley, and footprints of people like us who have been here before us. And you know, for a lot of us that have been in the Alps and have been to various huts and climbed Mont Blanc a few times, you know, all of those huts and all of those locations are mapped in there because of Anthony Adams Reilly as well. So 2 great Westmead men and 2 great Midlanders. And you know, maybe someday I'll have the opportunity to come back here in Everest and join somewhere way down the ranks of those great Midlands adventurers. But for now, from downtown Kathmandu, have a great night. Please enjoy. Thank you for what you're doing from a Midland perspective, from an adventure perspective. And please keep giving to Nepal. We need your help here more than ever. Thank you very much.
When the history of mountaineering is written for Ireland, I think our next guest has to be number 1, Dawson Stelfox, an incredible climber, a man who was taken part in 10 trips to the Himalayas, 10 expeditions, was climbed in almost every country in Europe, in New Zealand, United States, Canada. There's little or nothing that Dawson hasn't done. But Dawson is not just a climber, he's a man, a nice man. He has come down here to help us out tonight. He has come down before when he and the Irish team climbed Everest for the first time in 1993. Apart from the airport, the first press conference he gave was in Belvedere House here. So Dawson, your reputation with us is second to none, and I would like to call on you, please, to give us take us through the Mount Everest area.
Good evening, everybody. It's always difficult to live up to an introduction from Michael, but I'll do my best. I'm here to talk, I suppose, about the legacy of Ardbeary, which is enormous and of which I'm only aware of one very small part of it, which was his connections to Everest. And I'm using that as a means of telling a little bit about the story of our expedition to Everest in 1993, but also to what's happening in Nepal, which Paul has already told you a little bit about tonight. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail of that towards the end. One of the reasons I was involved in the very first ever really Irish expedition to Everest in 1993. And we went to the north side of Everest, the Tibetan side, the opposite side from the side that Everest had been first climbed in 1953. And one of the reasons we went to the north side of Everest, partly because it was more adventurous, hadn't had a British ascent at that stage or an Irish ascent, but one of the reasons behind that was this connection to Charles Ardbeary, leader of the very first ever reconnaissance expedition to Everest in 1921. So that was effectively at that stage what we understood to be the only Irish connection to the mountain. So it seemed fitting to go to that side of it. And in 1991, 92, 93, when we were planning the expedition, there was very little still known of that side of the mountain. But if you go back to 1921 or 1920, when Ardbeary was negotiating the permission to get in here, it was literally off the map as far as us in the West were concerned. It was described recently by a biographer, Mallory, as about the equivalent at that stage of going to the moon. There was probably still more known of the moon at that stage than there was of the northern side of Everest. So this was an adventure beyond our comprehension of the world today, because we're so used to seeing satellite images and photographs and all the rest of it. Of anywhere in the world, it was unknown where they were going to. And this was the team, they go, and as Kevin has struggled with before, I'm going to be struggling with the amount of daylight in here, but I'll try and describe to you what you can't make out in the pictures. You'll see this picture on the boards later on when we reveal them as well. But this was the team that went to the north side of Everest in 1921. Now, why was Ardbeary there as the leader? It wasn't as he was a mountaineer at all. He didn't come from a mountaineering background. He was a soldier, an adventurer, a traveller, well connected. But most importantly, I suppose, he had secured the permission for the expedition to go to Everest in the first place, and the permission from the Tibetan authorities there. And that, I suppose, brought out his skills as a diplomat, as somebody of standing, as somebody of gravitas, and somebody who was able to negotiate the delicate permission. And it wasn't, this was within living memory of a fairly disastrous British expedition into Tibet in 1904, which massacred a large number of Tibetans. And he was there only 16 years later. Ardbeary was able to negotiate permission for a group of foreigners to go into Tibet and make an attempt to climb what was a holy mountain to the Tibetans. So no mean feat to get permission to go here, and in a sense he was being rewarded by the Joint Committee of the Royal Geographical Society and the Alpine Club in London to lead this first expedition to there. And it was, I think, an inspired choice, and he led it very well in that. We'll talk a little bit about that. Ardbeary is second from the left in the back row, the best dressed, as befitting the gentleman, I suppose, in the tweed suit. Bottom left, the front row is George Mallory, who most of you will recognise the name. Mallory, obviously permanently associated with Everest, who was on the first reconnaissance 21, was on the expedition 22, and of course died lost on Everest in 1924, and still the mystery remains of whether Mallory and Irvine got to the summit in 24 or not. The other interesting connection in this photograph is the man second from the left beside Mallory, who is Oliver Wheeler. Oliver Wheeler was Canadian, but his father was Irish, and his father emigrated from Kilkenny, I think, Kevin, to Canada. Son was brought up there, and he was, again, a mountaineer, but more than a mountaineer, he was a surveyor, he was a mapper. And he played probably one of the most significant roles in 1921 expedition. Mallory gets all the credit and everything, but in fact Wheeler played possibly an even more important part than Mallory in this 21 expedition. I'll tell you a bit more about him. Because it was Oliver Wheeler who produced the map, the very first ever map of the Mount Everest region. You won't be able to see the detail, but again, it's going to be reproduced on the board, so you'll be able to study it later. Wheeler produced the close-up map of Everest, which you'll see in a moment. This is the map of their journey from Darjeeling across about 360 miles across the Tibetan Plateau and into the north side of Everest. On the way, they took this remarkable photograph. I think it's hand-tinted, coloured, in other words, a black and white photograph tinted afterwards with watercolours. But this is Shegar Zong, which was a fortified monastery. In Tibet, effectively there was no division between the government and the religious authorities. It was a religious controlled state, if you like, or kingdom. This Shegar Zong, which is the most fantastic castellated mountain, really, with towers built up along it. Now, this was destroyed by the Chinese when they invaded Tibet in the 1950s, and there's only rubble remains of this today, and I have some photographs of that rubble. But this was, as it was in 1921, and it must have been, it was an incredible sight from all the records that went in. This was effectively as they sort of came across the Tibetan Plateau and then turned south back towards Everest. Again, Shegar Zong was the sort of regional powerhouse. You can't really see this, but today there are other places where remnants of that style of building do survive. This is Lhasa. This is the Potala Palace in Lhasa, a photograph of mine from 20 years ago or so. And you can see the building, hopefully you can see the buildings survive in that size and scale. And even today, used as we are to large buildings, this is still, to my mind, one of the most impressive buildings in the world. So you can imagine what these fortified monasteries were like throughout Tibet before the Chinese invaded the 1950s. They were stunning buildings built in an incredible landscape. And Howard Bury's photographs from those early 1920s expeditions have produced an invaluable record of life before the Chinese invasion in the 1950s, and they're unique photographs that couldn't be taken again today because so much of that way of life was lost in the 1950s whenever the Chinese invaded. So the record of those photographs from the early expeditions, including Howard Bury's own photographs, is an invaluable and unique record of a way of life which is gone forever, was swept away. And I mentioned Oliver Wheeler. So Oliver Wheeler's task was to survey the immediate area around Everest. And so for most of the expedition, he was detached from the main climbing party, and he was on his own with a couple of local Nepalis. I think they were described as Sherpa Boshias. So the Sherpas are effectively Tibetan people who have moved across south into Nepal and settled in Nepal. But even at this stage, Sherpa Boshias were seen as the most reliable, hard-working, resilient, forceful porters, guides in the whole region. So although initially they used local people from all over the area, including Tibetan people, very early on in the history of mountaineering, Sherpas, the Tibetans who had resettled in Nepal, were being recognized as the most reliant of those. And Wheeler was using two of those as his assistants. And so for most of the 5 or 6 months that he was in the field, he was on his own with these Sherpas mapping the area. And as part of that map, again, you'll see this, but it's reproduced, I think, on the board. It was Wheeler, the second generation Irish from Canada, who actually discovered the key to getting up towards the north side of Everest, where everybody climbs the north side of Everest, climbs it down. It wasn't Mallory who discovered it, wasn't Howard Bury, but it was actually Oliver Wheeler. Because Mallory missed the junction of the east and west Mullingar glaciers, which provides the route up to the North Pole. Now they got to the North Pole in 1921 by a different way, much more complicated and contorted way, coming in through the Kama Valley in Tibet. But it was Oliver Wheeler's mapping expertise that discovered the route to the North Pole, which is used today. These are some of reproductions of some of Hartbury's own photographs, as reinforces that point. Hartbury was remarkable in the way most of the people on this expedition, if you say, were climbers, so they were coming out from a climbing point of view. Hartbury was remarkable, and he had a much wider range of interests other than just climbing. He was a botanist, he was a very skilled photographer working in the field in very different circumstances. But he was very interested in the Buddhist religion and meditation and a lot of the philosophy behind Buddhism. So he took a whole series of photographs and talked to interpreters to the Buddhists in these monasteries and recorded that and recorded their way of life, which is now gone, long gone, and forever. And even though there's some record of Mallory not getting on terribly well with Hartbury, one of Mallory's quotes that he was too much of a Tory landowner for my liking. In actual fact, when you read the documentation and read what Hartbury was doing, I think Hartbury comes out of it really better than Mallory does. Mallory was very dismissive of the Tibetans. He thought the place was a stinking mess. He couldn't work, and he couldn't cope with the sort of difficult living conditions in a lot of Tibetan villages. And it was Hartbury's writings and recordings which actually give a much more, I suppose you would say, contemporary, respectful view of Buddhism, of the Tibetan way of life, of the hardships of the people out there. So I think Bury in many ways was ahead of the prevailing attitudes at the time in terms of his understanding of the Tibetan people and the culture and Buddhism, and was very respectful, more respectful than future leaders of Everest expeditions, British expeditions like Charles Bruce and others as well. So the writings of Bury on Tibet and the recordings that he did and the way he went about liaising with local people, I would say is much more respectful and contemporary than many of the other people on the expedition. You know, the Tibetan way of life has changed utterly, but the people are very much the same. The bottom picture, which you can't really see very, very well, is two Tibetan yak herders that we had in 1993, and they look exactly the same as the Tibetan yak herders in the photographs of Hartbury in 1921. No surprise really, because it's still a hard land to operate in. They still very much live off the land. Use the yaks as the basis for their survival out there. So some things haven't changed in that time. This is a photograph of mine on the left of our base camp in 1993 with the Hartbury's photograph of their base camp in 1921. Same place at the upper end of the Rongbuk Glacier. Just above the Rongbuk Monastery, probably the highest monastery in the world, Buddhist monastery up in the mountains, where in Bury's time there were monks living in cells in the rock for years at a time, lived in the various. The Tibetan Buddhist monks lived in cells up in this high, remote valley. But that's Bury's base camp in there at the base of the moraine. Our camp was probably about half a mile further up the glacier, a bit of a sign of glacial retreat in the meantime, but in the same valley with Everest towering up above. And this is around about 15,000 feet above sea level, so Everest is about 29,000 feet, 14,000 feet above us. In this area, Bury climbed a smaller mountain called Kamat Changri. And Michael gave me a quote of Bury's earlier on, which I think is worth reading out, because it was Bury's description of the beauty of the place. And he's describing going up onto this summit early in the morning. And this is Hartbury's words now, to the Renaissance, with the north side of Everest behind. Another thing that's quite significant here that Robbie's standing with his back to the mountain, because these mountains are so big that you really have to sort of blinker yourself to their size and scale a lot of the time. And so you stand there, you have the big mountain behind you, you look out and you look out at all the other mountains that you're already higher than, and you start to think, oh, maybe I can get up this far, and maybe I can start to think, maybe I can go a bit further. But to a certain extent, you sort of have to blank out the scale of everything because it can overwhelm you otherwise, and you think of it in small bits. I'm compressing down here. We were on the mountain 2 months or so. So I'm compressing down into a few months the hard work of starting camps in the mountain, traveling up and down, trying to get acclimatized, waiting for the weather to improve, waiting out bad weather, coming back down the valley, right back down to base camp to acclimatize, to get cold, to eat a bit better. And that shuttling up and down is the hard work of any expedition. And it's the miserable bit of times, especially when the weather is bad. But all the time you're doing that, you're getting more acclimatized, your body's getting used to the altitude, and you're starting to think that maybe rather than turn your back to this, you can start to take down the next stage of the mountain, to move up a bit further, and put another camp into the place. So you start to think that you can move up into the higher reaches of it. Once you get beyond the North Col, you're sort of going psychologically into a different zone. 21,000 feet or so of the North Col, just about, if things go wrong, just about the height that a helicopter might be able to get you off. Beyond that, even though helicopters have now flown higher, the chances of it being able to do a rescue of any sort are pretty minimal. So you sort of psychologically, you're on your own from this point in time. Any form of rescue is going to be pretty unlikely. So that always brings that little extra edge to going up into these upper altitudes. And we had another 2 camps to base. So we had a camp in the North Col, and we put in 2 further camps on the mountain to give us a chance of getting to the summit. So one camped down to 2 small tents now at about 25,000 feet, and then bottom right, it's me in the tent at 27,000 feet, one very small tent the night before we went to the summit itself. At that stage, just Frank and myself in that top tent. Frank to himself. Following a day behind were Robbie Quinlan and Gordon O'Sullivan. So we were attempting to have 2 separate attempts on the top. Carefully judged really for weather. The weather becomes the single most important thing up here. You can't time. It's not like going out in Wicklow Hills or the Moors and whatever weather throws at you. You can only survive when the weather is good, in particular when the wind is down to a level that you can tolerate it. So the weather becomes all important in terms of making progress. But after a few days delay and moving around, waiting for the weather, Frank himself set out out towards the summit ridge on the 27th of May, I think it was, and started to move up to the upper part of the mountain. And that's a bit like the scene that Art Bury described in 1921. That's the sun starting to hit the summit peak of Everest when it moved from a cold, grey, dead shape into something warm and flooded with light. And so that's after already been climbing, because we set off in the dark, already been climbing 3 or 4 hours at this stage, and it's the first light of sunlight hitting the summit of Everest on our summit day. And a few shots now of just moving along that ridge. And what looks, mountains are tricky things. They fool you all the time. So you look up from the bottom and things look flat, because they're first shortened by the angle that we're looking at. So you fool yourself into thinking that things aren't that steep, or frankly fool yourself into thinking they're flat, even though you know perfectly well that mountains can't be flat. But you fool yourself into thinking they don't look so bad. But once you get up onto the summit ridge, and the right-hand shot in particular is moving along the summit ridge, you realise that it's not quite flat at all. In fact, it's quite steep. The big drops either side, and it's quite a difficult climb along that final summit ridge. Up until this point, this is coming up to the middle of the day. Now Frank and himself have been together, but Frank started having problems with breathing, not being able to get enough air in, started to feel like he was struggling a bit. So he decided at this point to turn back down, which is a very hard decision, a very brave decision, a very difficult decision for a mountaineer to take, one which is absolutely essential for your own survival as well. So Frank decided to turn back. It took one last photograph of me before he turned back. And this was a very good photograph, given the circumstances. I was heading on, he was heading back down, and I was heading towards what was known as the second step on the North Ridge. The second step is the psychological barrier of the north side of Everest. It was almost certainly what stopped Mullingar in Irvine in 1924. It certainly stopped all the other pre-war expeditions. None of them got beyond the second step. But the Chinese, who say, came to climb it in 1960, maybe did, had a fantastic story about it where the lead climber took off his boots at 8,500 meters and climbed it in his socks. Maybe he did. But anyway, when the Chinese came back in 1975, they decided they didn't want to take their boots off again, obviously, so they brought a ladder with them. So at 28,000 feet on the north side of Everest, there's now swinging in the breeze, 20-foot long loft ladder hanging there, which was brought up by the Chinese in 1975. And in fact, one of the Tibetan interpreter that we had at our base camp was one of the Tibetan porters the Chinese used to carry a section of that ladder up there. Now, until I was up there, we didn't know that ladder existed because there were no photographs available. It was just a story that was there. But it's there, it's real. It's been replaced by, I think, by a slightly longer ladder, more secure one. But it was there, and it's in the last 20 feet of the second step. It's about 200 feet altogether, so it's only one little bit in the second step. But the second step is the psychological barrier to getting up the north side of Everest, the physical barrier and the psychological barrier. And again, like a lot of things, once you've got past what you've built up in your mind as the psychological barrier, well then you can allow yourself to think that maybe it's possible. After all, maybe you can go on, maybe you can get further on up. So this is the shot now, slightly misty, it's snowing a bit at this stage. This was the top of the second step, top of the ladder, looking towards the final summit peak of Everest, still a few hundred feet above me. But now looking straight forward, really by comparison. And it's interesting, I wasn't aware of this at the time, but I had a radio and I was talking back down to mostly the German Summers, who was down in his camp at this stage. And up until the point I got up the ladder, when I was radioing back about every hour or so, I was saying things like, oh, the weather's not so good, I'm feeling very tired, I'm not sure how far I'm going to be able to go. And as soon as I got up the ladder on the second step, I was saying, the sun's coming out, I'm not feeling so bad, nice and warm up here, and I might make it. And I think that the key to any climbing, but the key in particular to high altitude climbing, is that it's in the mind, it's in the psychology of it, it's getting yourself into a position where you believe that you can do it and you push yourself on and to do it. There's so much of it, you're physically wrecked anyway, so much of it is just how your mind can control your body to get you up these things and usually get you down again as well. And so finally, put it out onto the summit ridge. That's the summit of Everest, the distance, big lump of snow. Corners there, you can about see a flag fluttering in the breeze. And that's the summit, a very bad self-portrait. It weren't called selfies in those days, so it's taken by myself because it was on my own. Not a footstep in the snow, I was glad to say. It was great remnants of some measuring devices which had been placed there, I think, the year before on the summit. And but quite late on in the day, it had taken me 12 hours to get up here from our top camp. It's very slow. My excuse is that there was a lot of snow around and it was hard going, but very slow nonetheless. So I didn't spend very long on the top, about 20 minutes or so, and then I had to get back down again. Because however important it is getting up, it's even more important to get back down again as well. And it was evening time. It was nearly 5 o'clock in the evening, and it got dark at about 9 o'clock. So I was running out of time, and only 4 hours of daylight. And of course, I didn't get down in daylight. It was dark, it turned dark on me, and it took me, I think, 6 or 7 hours to get back down to the top camp. But Frank got back safely as well. Robbie and Tony had come up. They were able to shine torches up to where they were, so I could find them and get back in. And I got safely back down to that top camp. And then you wake up the next morning and you realise you're still at 27,000 feet and you have to get yourself back down off the mountain as well. And anybody who climbed the mountain will know getting back down is more difficult most of the time than getting up the mountain. And it took another safely back down the North Col, and then finally back into the Alps base camp with Frank himself in the next storm coming back in to our base camp again. And that was the end. The weather turned bad. Robbie and Tony didn't make it up to the top. They got quite high, didn't get up there. But crucially, we all got back down off the mountain safely again. And everybody on the expedition had got over 8,000 metres. Richard Dean had been the first of us actually to get over 8,000 metres, placing Camp 2 and then getting up a bit further. John just a little bit below. And Mike Barry and McMurphy also got well over 8,000 metres in supporting us to get up to the top. So all the climbers had had a good expedition in the sense of got high on the mountain and been very much a part of the success of the trip. But the other people who were very much the success, part of the success of the trip, were some of the Nepalese that we had with us. We weren't using Sherpas high on the mountain deliberately. We wanted to go to the top on our own. But we had a lot of Nepalese and Sherpas working with us. One in particular was this guy with Dermot Summers. This is much later, quite a few years later. But a young Nepali who was one of our trick boys on that expedition. Many Nepalis that have various names that they use on different occasions, formal and informal. But we know him as Dana Bahadur Rai, the family name, or Dana Kali, sometimes he's called. But Dana was a cook boy, a young cook boy in 1993 on the Everest expedition. But we could see then that he was a very smart cook boy. And one of the legacies of our expedition and the success that it brought and the money that people contributed afterwards to slideshow and book and things like that, people like ourselves, set up a trust fund to help the people of Nepal who had helped us and other Irish climbers and trekkers so much. And one of the early recipients of an educational bursary was this guy, Dana. And Dana's gone on to be a very respected community leader in his village area in Nepal. It's an area in the Solu Khumbu, which is the area south of Everest on the Nepalese side. And we've been working there for the last 20 years or so now through the Irish Himalayan Trust, but also more recently through the Irish Nepalese Education Trust, which was set up by a number of the trekking support teams of Irish trekkers that came in to join us at base camp on our expedition. And that trust has gone extremely successfully over the last 20 odd years or so. We've got 3 primary schools and 2 community halls out there. We've been supporting teachers, we've been supporting people getting educated. And this is one of the schools. Myself and my wife Margaret were out here a bit ago. Went up to see the schools in action, and this is one of the schools. You won't be able to read that, but that's the plaque of the school commemorating the contributions of Irish walkers, climbers, trekkers, who, as I said, built 3 schools now and 2 community halls in this area. And obviously, our first thoughts when the earthquake happened 10 days, 2 weeks ago now, was for the safety and livelihood of our friends, relations, their children, of the people who are with us in Franklin Everest are now at this school. And there's been a lot of communication back out, and Paul Reilly, who you heard earlier on, has been involved in liaising with the people in this community and the wider people through the Nepal Ireland Society, and set up a very active fundraising campaign and channeling money directly into not just the area with them, setting it up on the top, and at the end of the day, we had effectively as like a mountain in Nepal, or a high class Nepal rather than in Donner. But that particular thing raised £4,500 in one day, and that was a huge effort. And people all over Ireland are doing something similar as you are tonight. And that initial money is being channeled into the Nepal Ireland Society, and you heard Paul talking earlier on. Paul has teamed up with them in Kathmandu and helping them distribute money, which is coming. So money is being directed initially now for this initial relief. So to Poland's medical help, food aid, but in the longer term, I mean, over the next few months, our challenge is to raise money for the reconstruction as well. In particular, the schools and villages, what I'm interested in is our area, the schools, the community halls have been damaged by the earthquake, and we're going to have to support them to get them rebuilt as well. And I think that's entirely fitting. And I think it's tremendous tonight to be able to use this celebration of Mark Derry and Reilly to highlight, in particular in Mark Derry's case, I think a case that he would have been very much intuitively sympathetic was, because in all his writings he does, to my mind, he does recognise the specialness of the people of these mountains, their religion, their culture, their background, their history, and he put big efforts into recording that and celebrating that and trying to understand it beyond what would have been the convention of people coming from the West at the time. So tonight I'm really pleased to be able to be here with you to celebrate the life and the work of Reilly, but in particular I suppose we got here Derry, and he made a huge impression in the world. That's only one part of his life, but from my point of view, a really important one. The legacy goes on today as well. So thank you very much.
I think one word you can use for that, spellbinding. Thank you, Doss. Spellbinding. Before we launch the panel, I'd just like to tell you a couple of little things about Colonel Bury. When Everest was first climbed, that was Tenzing and Hillary. They came down from the mountain, and of course they celebrated with the base camp crew. They went ecstatic. The leader of the team at the time was John Hunt, and it had been arranged that he would send a coded signal to the British Embassy in Kathmandu, which he did. And by some means then, the embassy in Kathmandu had a secret agreement to send a coded message to London. The message was received in London that day. The whole idea was that the Queen was being crowned the following day, and the Brits wanted to announce the ascent of Everest on that day. But on the evening before, 2 people were notified of a successful attempt. One was the Queen Mother, and the other was Howard Bury. Just an interesting point. And another point about him was that seemingly very often during the war, a visitor would come down from Dublin on a Sunday, and they'd fish, and they'd shoot, and they'd walk in the garden, and then they'd eat a 10-course meal. The visitor was Sir John Letchman, the great poet laureate. And those of you who are into poetry, can I suggest that you might buy some of his poetry? He has written some wonderful stuff about Rabin and Belvedere, some very, very funny stuff. A wonderful man. And following on from that, he died in 1984. His wife died 10 years later. And in that interim period, she was a doctor. She had gone to do voluntary missionary work in Nepal. She had left in her will that she wanted to be buried wherever she dropped. She came down from the mountains sometime, she'd been on horseback, dismounted, had a heart attack and died, and she's buried there. Just a lovely thought. Now I just want to read you a short extract of the Colonel Bury, what a man he was. This is an account. He was going to Siberia, and this is what he said about the joys of travel. He said, to me, at any rate, and I think to most people, whether we walk, or whether we ride, or whether we drive, the most abiding joy of travel will always lie in the retrospect. The memories of some days, of some scenes, where the world appears altogether too beautiful for us, where we can only gaze in awe and rapture at some marvelous creation of the Almighty. Such memories as these are truly a possession which we can treasure and which will remain always to us as a source of inexhaustible pleasure and a delight when we look back upon the days of travel. Wonderful words. Now, the purpose of tonight is to launch our permanent panel exhibition on the walls here in honour of Howard Bury and of Adam Reilly. These panels were, if you like, suggested by Frank Nugent, Dawson Stelfox, Frank Higgins, or Kevin Higgins and myself. They were actually done for us by Cormac Finnerty and his partner is Gary Kelly. Cormac, you will remember, as I do, leading for 6 laps at 5,000 metres in the Olympic Games in Atlanta. The sweat coming off him, and it's no disgrace to be beaten by the greatest runners in history, El Garouge, Reilly, Gabri Selassie. Anyway, now I'd like to call on Dawson, Kevin, and Marion, and Peter, the Mountaineers, to formally launch these panels. I hope you will have a good look at them and enjoy them. They are an exact replica of the handouts that you have been given coming in. Thank you.
Now, good evening everybody, and I think I'll take up where Dawson left off, because he has already covered a lot of the mountaineering, the flora, the fauna, etc., which I had the intense pleasure, or sometimes the awful frustration, of reading what an individual word might be, of asking the exponent to explain something to me, of having to wait until the Cambridgeshire Derby was over before he would answer me, or being told, would you ever bugger off? I've just got something else to do. So it was in that circumstances that I came to do an important, and that type of thing improves if you keep watching it, that the extent to which new material has been produced, re-imaged, as in the Royal Geographic Society have done a very interesting publication, Imaging Everest. So by clicking under several headings in Google, you'll be able to find an enormous amount of what Charles Howard. The full biography on which I have been working has unfortunately been delayed, but two publications which I quarried from the extensive documentation which he had left unedited were, number one, The Mountains of Heaven, and Michael has just quoted from that about the joys of travel. The Mountains of Heaven were the Tiantian Mountains, and that was not published. Photographs over there, and he started to do an inventory of what he had inherited, a major art collection, which is very nice, and both British and Irish tax authorities were more than easily with him, and he had to sell some major works of English and Irish silver, which need to be returned to Ireland perhaps now, and the vast collection of works of art in the Fitzwilliam Gallery in Cambridge, which was donated there by Charles Brinsley Marley. And at the moment, I'm getting so many emails, so many queries from students all over the place. I don't know how to find me sometime, but I could have a full-time job. However, in the interest of some of the really worthwhile
we're going to have a look at 2 maps that are here, but very reduced, unfortunately, we saw on the screen due to the light. The top one, the drainage map of the area, and then the other readers map of the area immediately around itself. And that was produced on that, which is under the emphasize again, difficulty of going to this remote, difficult area. Basically one man and two local surveyors, Oliver Wheeler, son of Malcolm Kilkenny, produced this map in the most difficult and terrible circumstances, and it proved to be remarkably accurate. Amazing.
Thanks, Beth. Now you're all free to look here, say a looks like maybe 100 years in the making, but it's still a permanent exhibition, and we're all delighted to have you here. Thank you all very, very much.
It hasn't really been said. This wouldn't have happened but for the